Hi everyone, Max here from Evidence-Based Football Manager. This is part 5 of my Matchday Mechanics Analysis series for FM24. I'll be talking about 5 different game mechanics today: player morale, positional rating, consistency, important matches, and tactical familiarity. These are all parameters in the game that are related to individual player performance in Football Manager. And all these 5 factors are relatively straightforward to test, which is why I've decided to cover them all in a single video today. Let's start with the first topic for today, which is player morale. There are 20 different levels of player morale in FM24, the highest of which is perfect and the lowest of which is abysmal. There are tons of different in-game events that can either increase or decrease player morale, such as winning or losing a match, praising a player, criticizing a player, and so on. The question is, does it all matter? Does player morale actually affect the actual individual player performance on the pitch in the game? That's what I'm trying to find out. The test setup is pretty straightforward. As always, I use my test cup save file for today's tests. Immediately before the start of the test cup match, I set the morale of Team A players from the test cup save file to 5 different levels: perfect, very good, okay, quite poor, and abysmal. Each time I changed player morale of Team A players, I ran the exact same test cup match 1,000 times, and I recorded the outcomes of those trials. Morale of Team B, which is the opposition team in the test cup match, was held constant at OK at all times in these tests. And let's take a look at the results. I have a bar graph here that shows you the outcomes of the test cup trials as I changed Team A's morale to 5 different levels. When Team A's morale was set to perfect, they won 50.2% of the time, draws happened 23.7% of the time, and Team B won 26.1% of the time. So here Team A has dominated Team B in these test cup trials. When Team A's morale was set to very good, Team A won 49.1% of the time, and Team B won 27.7% of the time. So here Team A still won a lot more matches compared to Team B. And it's interesting to note that there's very little difference between these first 2 results when Team A's morale was set to either perfect or very good. This means that when you're playing Football Manager, you don't have to try to maintain the morale of your players to near perfect levels. As long as the morale of your players is maintained at a reasonably high level, it will have a positive impact on the performance of your players in Football Manager. The third result here is the control, which is when the morale of both Team A and Team B players were set to OK. Here Team A won 38.7% of the time, and Team B won 36.4% of the time. So Team A did win slightly more compared to Team B, but I am happy to accept this slight difference in win rate between Team A and Team B as being within the limits of random variance. The fourth result here is when Team A's morale was set to quite poor. Here, Team A won 37% of the time, and Team B won 38% of the time. So here, Team A's win rate has fallen slightly compared to the control, although the difference compared to the control is relatively minor. This last bar here is when Team A's morale was set to abysmal, which is the lowest possible morale in the game. Here, Team A won 33% of the time, and Team B won 44% of the time. So here Team B has won significantly more than Team A compared to the control. So it seems that a little bit of drop in player morale doesn't affect player performance to a significant degree in FM24, but morale can start negatively affecting player performance if it drops by too much. So guys, when you're playing Football Manager, do make efforts to maintain the morale of your players as much as possible. I know it's easier said than done because in Football Manager, players get pissed off for all sorts of different reasons. But now that you know that morale does matter in Football Manager, do be mindful of it, and do what you can to maintain the morale of your players as much as possible. Okay, let's move on to the second topic for today, which is positional rating. In Football Manager, how familiar a player is at playing at a certain position on the field is given a rating out of 20. And in the game, this is represented by a circle that changes its color from red to yellow to orange to green. The game also uses labels such as awkward, unconvincing, competent, and natural to give you an indication of a player's positional rating. Do take note that players in Football Manager always have to have at least one position on the pitch with a 20 out of 20 rating, which is represented in the game with a bright green circle. The question is, does it all matter? Is it really that important to field players at a position that they're familiar with? That's what we're trying to find out. I used the test save file again for these tests. I set the positional rating of Team A players in the test save file to 4 different levels: 1 out of 20, 10 out of 20, 15 out of 20, and 20 out of 20. The positional rating of Team B players, which is the opposition team in these test cup trials, was held constant at all times at 20 out of 20. Every time I changed the positional rating of Team A players, I ran 1,000 trials and I recorded the outcomes of those trials. And let's take a look at the results. Again, I have a bar graph here that shows you the outcomes of the test cup trials as I changed the positional rating of Team A players. When the positional rating of Team A players was set to 1 out of 20, Team A won just 4.7% of the time, which means they got absolutely dominated by Team B in these trials. When Team A's positional rating was set to 15 out of 20, Team A won 30% of the time, which is better than the first and the second results, but they still got outmatched significantly by Team B. And this last result is the control, which is when both Team A and Team B players had 20 out of 20 positional ratings. Here there's a roughly equal split of the number of wins between Team A and Team B, which is what you would expect from a control. So you can see from these results that positional rating does matter in Football Manager. In fact, it matters quite a lot. Even here, when the positional rating of Team A players was set to 15 out of 20, Team A showed a significant drop in performance compared to the control. So guys, when you're playing Football Manager, really make sure that you field your players at a position that they're familiar with if you don't want their performance to suffer. Okay, let's move on to the third game mechanic that I'm going to cover today, which is consistency. Consistency is one of the hidden attributes of players in Football Manager. The game doesn't tell you exactly how the consistency mechanic works. Surprise, surprise, that's Football Manager for you. But there is a post made on the FM Scout website all the way back in 2013 that sheds a bit of insight into the consistency mechanic. This post is apparently sourced directly from the Sports Interactive staff members. I know it's a post made more than 10 years ago, but let's be honest people, the core mechanic of Football Manager changes very little over time, so I do think it's worth taking a look at this post. So apparently, according to this post, consistency acts as a modifier that's applied to the current ability rating of players in Football Manager at the start of each match in the game. For example, let's say a player's current ability rating is 160. This doesn't mean that the player's CA rating will be 160 in every single match that he plays in. You're supposed to divide the player's consistency by 25, and that is the percentage chance that the player's CA rating will stick to its original value. Let's say the player's CA rating is 160 and the player's consistency is 10 out of 20. So you divide 10 by 25, which is 40%. So the player's CA rating will be 160 only 40% of the time. The other 60% of the time, the player's CA rating will fluctuate to levels below 160. If a player has high consistency, then there will be a higher chance that the player's original CA rating will stick to its original value, thereby ensuring a more consistent run of performances over a series of matches. Again, all this is according to a post that was made all the way back in 2013. But does the consistency mechanic actually work as intended in the current version of the game? That's what I'm trying to find out. The test setup is, again, pretty straightforward. I set the consistency attribute of Team A players from the test save file to 3 different levels: 1 out of 20, 10 out of 20, and 20 out of 20. And I conducted 1,000 repeat trials for each of those 3 scenarios. Consistency of Team B players was held constant at all times at 10 out of 20. My hypothesis is this: if the consistency mechanic works as intended, then players with high consistency will conserve their original CA ratings more frequently, which will lead to superior performance on the pitch on a more frequent basis, which will ultimately lead to a superior team performance on a more frequent basis. And let's take a look at the results. When the consistency of Team A players was set to 1 out of 20, Team A won 37.4% of the time, and Team B won 37.5% of the time. So it's a very even split right down the middle between Team A and Team B. When players of both Team A and Team B had 10 out of 20 consistency, Team A won 38.7% of the time, and Team B won 36.4% of the time. So again, it's a pretty more or less similar split between Team A and Team B, which is what you would expect from a control, since here both players of both teams had the same consistency of 10 out of 20. When the consistency of Team A players was set to 20 out of 20, Team A won 38.3% of the time, and Team B won 35.1% of the time. So Team A did win about 3.2% more than Team B, although it's hard to say whether this difference of 3.2% between Team A and Team B is due to the different levels of consistency between the two teams. If this 3.2% difference in win rate between Team A and Team B is indeed due to the consistency mechanic, then I must say consistency has not been as impactful on player performance as I anticipated. This is my guess as to why consistency has not had a noticeable impact on Team A's overall performance in these test cup trials. In my test cup save file, the players all have a relatively low CA rating between 90 to 100. Even if we assume that low consistency can lead to a drop in a player's CA rating on a more frequent basis, since all these test cup players already have a very mediocre CA rating to begin with, a bit of drop in their CA ratings may not be enough to cause an actual drop in their performance on the pitch, at least to a degree that will translate into a lower win rate for the team. So in order to address this limitation of the test cup save file, I decided to run another set of experiments regarding the consistency mechanic, this time using a real match in FM24 instead of the test cup save file. I decided to use the Community Shield match held between Arsenal and Man City at the start of the Premier League season. Players from Arsenal and Man City all have a way higher CA rating compared to the players from my test cup save file, so my expectation was that a drop off in a player's CA rating caused by a low consistency will have a larger impact on player performance compared to the players from my test cup save file. Just like the previous test using the test cup save file, I changed the consistency rating of Arsenal and Man City players to various levels, and I conducted 1,000 repeat trials for each of those scenarios. And let's take a look at the results. I have a bar graph here that shows you the number of wins for Arsenal and Man City as a result of repeated Community Shield trials, as I changed the consistency rating of Arsenal and Man City players to various levels. Firstly, when consistency of Arsenal players was set to 1 out of 20 and consistency of Man City players was set to 20 out of 20, Arsenal won 197 times out of 1,000 and Man City won 551 times out of 1,000. So Man City has dominated Arsenal in these Community Shield trials. When I set consistency of both Man City and Arsenal players to 10 out of 20, Arsenal won 278 times and Man City won 455 times. So Man City still won a fair bit more than Arsenal, but Arsenal's win rate has gone up quite a bit compared to the first scenario. And lastly, in the third test, when Arsenal players had 20 out of 20 consistency and Man City players had 1 out of 20 consistency, Arsenal won 356 times and Man City won 360 times. So Man City still won slightly more than Arsenal here, but Arsenal's win rate has again gone up quite significantly compared to the previous two scenarios. So here in these tests using the Community Shield trials, the impact of the consistency attribute on team performance is a lot more obvious compared to my previous tests using the Test Cup trials. As the consistency attribute of Arsenal players went up, the number of wins for Arsenal in the Community Shield trials also went up by a significant degree, which suggests that consistency does work as intended in FM24. Alright, moving on to the fourth game mechanic that I'm going to cover today, which is the Important Matches attribute. Important Matches is another hidden attribute in Football Manager. It's supposed to make your players perform better in matches that have a higher reputation. But does it actually work? Let's find out. This is how I set up the tests. I set up 6 different test scenarios, all based on the test cup save file. In those 6 scenarios, the reputation of the test cup match was set to 3 different levels: 200 out of 200, 100 out of 200, and 1 out of 200. And the important matches attribute of Team A players was set to 2 different levels: 20 out of 20 and 1 out of 20. My hypothesis here is this. If the important matches attribute is working as intended in FM24, then when the reputation of the test cup is set to 200 out of 200, Team A players should perform better when their important matches attribute is set to 20 out of 20 instead of 1 out of 20. On the other hand, when the reputation of the test cup match is set to either 100 out of 200 or 1 out of 200, the performance of Team A players should not be affected by the important matches attribute, since important matches is supposed to affect player performance only in competitions with a high reputation. So let's take a look at the results. I have a graph here that shows you the outcome of the test cup trials as I change the reputation of the test cup match, and also the important matches attribute of Team A players. When the reputation of the test cup match was set to 200, and the important matches attribute of Team A players was set to 20 out of 20, Team A won 51.4% of the time. When the important matches attribute was set to 1 out of 20, Team A won 30.6% of the time. So based on these first 2 results, it does appear that the important matches attribute of Team A players has had an impact on the level of Team A's performance. When the reputation of the test cup match was set to 100 out of 200, and Team A's important matches attribute was set to 20 out of 20, Team A won 44.6% of the time, whereas when Team A's important matches attribute was set to 1 out of 20, Team A won 31.4% of the time. So here again, the important matches attribute of Team A players has had an impact on Team A's win rate, although the magnitude of that impact is not as big as the first 2 scenarios when the reputation of the test cup was set to the maximum value of 200 out of 200. Lastly, when the reputation of the test cup match was set to 1 out of 200, and Team A's important matches attribute was set to 20 out of 20, Team A won 40.2% of the time, whereas when Team A's important matches was set to 1 out of 20, Team A won 37.8% of the time. So here, Team A still performed a little bit better when the important matches attribute was set to 20 out of 20, but the magnitude of the impact caused by the important matches attribute is a lot less compared to the previous scenarios when the test cup match had a higher reputation. So based on these results, I am happy to make the conclusion that the important matches attribute does work as intended in FM24. When a player has a high important matches attribute, the player will perform better in a competition with a high reputation. When a player has a low important matches attribute, the player will perform worse in a competition with a high reputation. In competitions with a lower reputation, the important matches attribute will still affect the performance of your players to some degree, but the magnitude of that influence on the performance of your players will not be that great. Okay people, moving on to the last topic for today, which is tactical familiarity. You can find the tactical familiarity of your team for the tactic that you're using by hovering your mouse over this part here. Tactical familiarity is broken down into 8 different components in the game. Don't ask me what these eight components do. It's something we don't talk about around here, okay? All I'm going to do is to run some trials using my test cup save file so that we can find out whether tactical familiarity works as intended in FM24. I used the Football Manager real-time editor to set the tactical familiarity of Team A to 3 different levels: 1%, 50%, and 100%. I ran 1,000 trials each time, and I recorded the outcomes of those trials. And let's take a look at the results. I have a bar graph here, again, that shows you the outcomes of the test cup trials. When Team A and Team B both had 100% tactical familiarity, Team A won 38.7% of the time, and Team B won 36.4% of the time. So it's a pretty even split between Team A and B. When I set Team A's tactical familiarity to 50%, Team A won 38.8% of the time, and Team B won 37% of the time. So there was negligible difference in Team A's win rate in this scenario, despite Team A having a lower technical familiarity. When I set Team A's technical familiarity to 1%, Team A won 36.4% of the time, and Team B won 36.6% of the time. So if you compare these three sets of results, I do have to say that tactical familiarity of Team A has had a negligible impact on the overall performance of both Team A and Team B. I wasn't sure what to make of the results that I obtained from the test cup trials, so I decided to run some field tests using a real match in FM24 instead of the test cup match. I chose the Community Shield match again, that's held between Arsenal and Man City. I set the technical familiarity of Arsenal players to 3 different levels, 1%, 50% and 100%. Technical familiarity of Man City was held constant at 100% at all times. I ran 1,000 trials each time I changed Arsenal's technical familiarity, and I recorded the outcomes of those trials. And let's take a look at the results. When both Arsenal and Man City had 100% technical familiarity, Arsenal won 21% of the time, and Man City won 48% of the time. When I changed Arsenal's technical familiarity to 50%, Arsenal won 23.7% of the time, and Man City won 47.6% of the time. And lastly, when I changed Arsenal's tactical familiarity to 1%, Arsenal won 24% of the time, and Man City won 49% of the time. So based on these results using the Community Shield trials, the level of tactical familiarity of Arsenal players did not affect Arsenal's overall win rate in the Community Shield matches. It's a result that corroborates the test results that I obtained using the Test Cup save file. Both the Test Cup trials and the Community Shield trials did not produce any evidence that tactical familiarity is working as intended in FM24. I'm not saying that tactical familiarity is broken in this game. There could be reasons why tactical familiarity didn't work as intended in my tests. Maybe the Football Manager real-time editor that I used to edit the tactical familiarity of players in my tests was malfunctioning. Maybe I just made some stupid mistake when I used Microsoft Excel to record and compile all the data. Who knows? In any case, all I can say at this point is that based on the tests that I've done, using the Test Cup trials and the Community Shield trials, I couldn't find any evidence that tactical familiarity is working as intended in FM24. Alright folks, time to make a summary of today's video. 1. Player morale does work as intended in FM24. High player morale improves player performance on the pitch, whereas low player morale undermines player performance on the pitch. The relationship between morale and performance isn't strictly linear though. It appears that the positive effects of high morale is obtained relatively easily, even when morale isn't excessively high. And on the other hand, low player morale only starts to harm the performance of your players only when morale is excessively low. 2. Positional rating of players does work as intended in FM24. High positional rating improves player performance on the pitch, whereas low positional rating undermines player performance on the pitch. So when you're playing Football Manager, do make sure that you field your players at a position on the pitch that the players are familiar with. 3. The consistency attribute does work as intended in FM24. You divide a player's consistency rating by 25, and that's the percentage chance that the player's original current ability rating will be conserved in a match in Football Manager. For example, 20 out of 20 consistency means that the player's original CA rating will be conserved 80% of the time, making the player's performance relatively consistent over a series of matches. Whereas 10 out of 20 consistency means that the player's CA rating will only be conserved 40% of the time, making the player's performance less consistent over a series of matches. Do take note that the consistency mechanic is more impactful for players with a high current ability rating, because any fluctuations in CA rating caused by a low consistency rating will be more consequential if the player's original CA rating is quite high to begin with. 4. The important matches attribute does work as intended in FM24. In competitions with a high reputation, players with a high important matches attribute will perform better compared to players with a low important matches attribute. In competitions with a low reputation, players with a high important matches attribute will still perform slightly better compared to players with a low important matches attribute, but the difference in player performance will not be as significant as the degree of difference in player performance in competitions with a high reputation. 5. I could not find any evidence that tactical familiarity is working as intended in FM24. I'm not saying that tactical familiarity is broken in this game. There could be reasons why tactical familiarity didn't work as intended in the tests that I've conducted. But yeah, according to the tests that I've done, I couldn't find any evidence that tactical familiarity could affect the performance of your team in FM24. Alright guys, that is all for today. As always, thanks a lot for watching. If you have any comments or feedbacks, leave them in the comment section below and I will do my best to reply to them. In my next video, I will be making a very important announcement regarding the future of this channel. So stay tuned and yeah, I'll see you all next time. Bye.